My name is Karina Harney, Playboy's Playmate of the Year, 1992.
And I'm Echo Johnson, Miss January, 1993. Welcome to the Bunny Chronicles. Let's go.
All right.
I'm recording audio, so there you go.
Put on my headphones.
All right.
Let's see. I can never
Left. This is going to be your left side.
I swear I'm a pro podcaster, even though I can't figure out my headphone stitch. Okay.
Good.
Can I get a little
Then
more
we can
on that?
see here. This is connected to that. It's a little jumbled up.
Okay, cool. Got it.
All right.
Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to another edition of the Bunny Chronicles. Today, we have a surprise for you guys. We are going to have a rotating group of people coming in as guest co-host. They are all from Playboy. There will be some Playmates. And today, we have John Champion joining us, who also worked at Playboy, and he's a colleague of mine. And he was kind enough to let us use the studio at Roddenberry Foundation. So this is really, really, really cool.
Here we are. Yeah.
So
Nice
John, why don't you give everyone the lowdown who you are and
Sure. So, my current job is that I podcast and I got to talk about science fiction and Star Trek and big ideas and philosophical ideas in science fiction. And that's very cool to me. And of course, that was all started in the 60s by another kind of forward-thinking lightning rod of a person, and that was Gene Roddenberry.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, the parallels in my life. So I worked at Playboy in the early 90s, and now I'm here, and I think wow, here's another guy, this other iconic pop culture figure who kept everything, kept every scrap of paper, every memo, every photo, everything. So we literally, on the other side of that wall, have this huge archive room with decades and decades of materials. And,
that's right.
And, the parallels are close.
Very similar to, what Hugh Hefner did throughout, the 60 years of Playboy. I mean, he was the consummate archivist.
Yeah,
so
100%.
Very cool. So what years were you at Playboy, your position, and how many?
Yeah, so I want to say that as soon as I moved to New York to go to school, so I would have been late 90.
Okay.
I was one of those people just kind of banged on the door like, hey, I'd like a job here, please. And,
that's awesome.
And I remember the HR manager, Jerry Nobile, at the time. I finally got in the door and she just said, she didn't even look me in the eye. She was like, are you here for the girls?
Oh my gosh, really? That is classic.
Right? And I just go no. You I'm a journalism student. I want to start with the best.
Right.
I will do anything.
Right.
And I kind of had this head for trivia, and it became helpful. So I started out as an intern in the publisher's office. At the time, the publisher was a guy named Mike Perlis, and Hef was still very much involved.
Yeah.
But the 90s were this interesting kind of transition period. We were trying out some new things, right?
Well, it was the dawn of the World Wide Web, and that really changed everything. And Playboy was definitely behind the 8 ball on that one. And I had a really unique experience with that because I realized, the opportunity in that, and I went ahead and I created a website. I taught myself how to build a website, membership base, etc. Playboy then, reached out and said, you can't do this and that and whatever. But I came to an agreement with them that I could use the term Playmate and then do the registered trademark for Playboy. So I ended up having this website that I then went on and produced. 5 years I had it, and I produced 36,640 images that I own today because I would have to post a gallery every week.
Wow.
But with that said, I was able to secure the best makeup artists, the photographers, and I knew the look I was going after from being a Playmate.
Sure.
So And then at that point, when I did get the approval, I reached out to Christy Hefner and I had a conversation with her. And I said, you know, this is a really big thing and it's not going away. And it's probably something, you know, department you guys should, you know, do.
So, okay, you know what's wild is that from that time, so I started in late 90, early 91 as an intern for the publisher. And then that period came to an end. But other people, I mean, thank goodness I did a good enough job. They were like, wait, we want John now. So I went over to PR and then I went to graphics and then back to PR. And I stayed for 5 years.
Right.
And kind of an assistant role, but learning every possible thing that I could from anybody who I met. But as you're saying this, I'm thinking, you know, I was there during the transition of, we had an inter-office, I guess, intranet, which was really good for about, you know, sending an email.
Yeah.
That was it.
About it. Yeah. That was the scope of technology then.
By the time I moved to Chicago and Playboy.com was, and there were these little, like, I don't even know what you'd call them now, like an e-magazine attempt.
Right.
Every now, all bitmap, black and white, looked terrible. But by the time I got to Chicago, I remember Playboy.com was a reality or soon to be a reality. Like Eileen Kent, that was her department.
Yeah, the .com department, exactly.
Yeah, and I remember being amazed going to somebody's like work area and there was this scanner and it was like half the size of a VW.
And it weighed a ton, I'm sure.
It did. And they were like, no, look, we can scan a picture and it only takes like 3 minutes and it's a drum scanner and this thing costs like 30 grand.
Totally.
And my mind is blown, right? And of course now in 2022,
it's like
you go to Best Buy, you know, buy $100 scanner, it'll do as good a job. Maybe not quite as good, but just the technology change is phenomenal.
And that was a really interesting time. I mean, you saw a ton of really, you know, massive changes, you know, and obviously they did catch up with it and, you know, realized that it was a big component of what the world was going to be moving forward. So early 90s, and when did you leave?
95.
95.
So I was there for a good almost 5 years.
Awesome. And I love that you hopped around to different departments. And that is something that Karina and I both have found, you know, when we've interviewed the guests for the first season. Not so much hopping around. Well, like obviously the photographers, like that was their role, but there was a handful of people that were able to work in different departments. And it was definitely by design because Hef knew what you were good at and where you would thrive. And it really was just the creme de la creme of talent that was at that company.
To this day, I will say that the most talented people I have ever worked with in a professional environment were all there. And it was cool just getting to know people there, particularly at that time in my life. You know, I'm in school getting a journalism degree, then I'm out and I'm just...
And you get to go right into Playboy. That's huge.
Exactly.
Huge.
And going from department to department, getting to know people and just getting that helping hand. Like, even if it's something small. Here, take a look at these lines from an interview. What would you pull to put on those 3 little pictures at the bottom of the page?
It always was a group effort.
It was fantastic. And I was rarely ever afraid to ask questions. There were a few people there who intimidated me, I won't lie.
Of course. I mean, there's some big players there. Me too.
But I was rarely afraid to ask questions or just get to know somebody who did something different than what I did. And particularly when I moved from New York to Chicago, that was a whole other learning experience.
Totally different,
you know? And I want to give a shout out to, he is long gone, but somebody who I really considered a mentor, Asa Baber, wrote the men column for the magazine. And I met him when he came through to New York to do a speaking engagement. And when I moved to Chicago, I reached out to him and he was so kind to invite me out to lunch and just sort of
mentor you.
Give me this like acclamation to Playboy in Chicago. He passed away. He had ALS, and he documented his diagnosis
Uh-huh.
and what was happening in his column in the
Uh-huh.
magazine. It was
That's
really
very cool.
quite a blow.
So I'd never heard of him, and I say this every single time we interview somebody. We pull out this golden nugget of history and learn more about Playboy. So I'll have to do some research into that and learn about him. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah,
that.
the great thing was that Ace was there for a long time, and then they countered the men column with Cynthia Heimel's women column.
Uh-huh.
And for a number of years, you just sort of turned the page, and there was Ace's column and Cynthia's column about just sort of current events, social, topical, whatever. But how does this impact the definition of what being a man is now, or a woman? And sometimes they'd go at each other. Sometimes they would find common ground. It was a really cool way to have that conversation in those pages.
Absolutely, and again, totally indicative of all the journalism in that magazine. It was objective. It was like it was presented, and you decide. It was never like like media is today.
Well, I think
pushing falsehoods or creating these narratives that are untrue.
I mean, I think what's interesting, because I don't disagree with you. I think there's a little bit of a nuance or a difference in the media landscape, though, that's worth understanding.
That's true.
Because I feel like Playboy always had, particularly when it found its footing, starting from the 60s forward, had this liberal, progressive, socially conscious point of view. That was always baked into it. But at the same time, the rigors of journalism were very clear in the magazine. So you take a magazine that was one of the first national platforms to come out against the Vietnam War or for individual drug rights. Like, these are things that Time magazine, it takes time for them to catch up to. But the nice thing about Playboy is that they could do it in a way that was so studied and thoughtful and thorough.
Exactly.
That, you might be reading a point of view, but you're getting very good information to back up that point of view. Yeah,
exactly. And obviously, that's always the thing. Like, I read Playboy for the articles, and again, just from doing the show and just doing all the research, I had never taken the time to sit down and read anything, and my mind was blown away when I really started reading some stuff. And then the interview with Jim Peterson. Yeah. And that really put it all into perspective. And I was like, of course it was like that.
He's one of the people who really intimidated me. Because, I mean, seriously, because I was like, 20, 21, 22 years old. I just thought, like, he's the smartest person here.
He's so interesting.
He knows everything. Now I thought your interview with him was great, and he's somebody who I'd love to just pick his brain again.
Yeah, that's funny you said 23 years old, because that's exactly the age that he was when he came in, and he also went right into Playboy out of college, and he went into the position as a staff writer, and have said, perfect, you're a young man, go out into the world and write about what's going on out there with the sexual revolution and complete freedom.
And that's again what's so important about the magazine is just, I really feel like today we've lost something where media consumption is so fractured.
Yes.
Like, it's not even that there are points of view, because there are, and news masquerades as opinion and vice versa. But you don't have a really central, strong force anymore to drive a social conversation. I think that's where Playboy is at its strongest.
Absolutely, I agree.
People could agree or disagree with the ideas, but at least they had this very thorough base of knowledge coming from the magazine.
It generated a conversation.
And the best writers doing it. So I always thought, if you said that you only read Playboy for the articles, first of all, get new material, because that joke is trite and needs to be retired. I mean, that joke started in 1953. Okay?
That joke is trite. I love that.
It needs to be retired at this point. But I always felt like if you were only reading Playboy for the articles, you were missing something. And if you didn't read Playboy for the articles, you were also missing something, because it was this total editorial package that says, okay, look, food and drink and great photography and a conversation about sex and sexuality and sexual roles. Like, this is all important to talk about
Mhm.
in a shame-free environment,
Mhm.
you know?
I mean, it was a completely interactive magazine, and it was, revolutionary, and nobody had done anything like that, nor moving forward will that type of publishing exist again,
Yeah. What I love is when you look back and you see all the places that the magazine broke ground.
Yes.
And I'll bring it back to what I do now. So, here I am doing this show, multiple shows about science fiction and Star Trek, but almost always with a social relevance, about social issues.
Mhm.
And we were talking about, this is years ago, we were talking about an episode of Star Trek called The Outcast. And this came out in the 90s. And it pushed the envelope a little bit, but then it didn't quite enough in its addressing of sexuality and sexual roles. You had a planet where everybody was androgynous.
Oh,
and if you
interesting.
expressed as male or female, you were the outcast. And,
Whoa, that's so interesting because of the climate of our times right now.
and even to the extent that they would be reprogrammed
Right.
if they expressed as, so it was like this discussion about things like, gender therapy and these awful things that still happen now, right? And doing a little research, I think it was 1955 that Playboy published The Crooked Man by Charles Beaumont.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love, this is what I love about the power of a magazine at the time, where you don't have a million fractured voices. They put out this magazine to this audience of, the urbane gentleman, right?
Right.
Positing a world where homosexuality is the norm and heterosexuality is persecuted, right? The way that in 1955 homosexuals were persecuted.
Yep.
If they were even out.
Right.
Because most of the time they weren't,
Rarely.
And I'm sure that they got a barrage of letters in the mail from people either praising or condemning the magazine for this choice. And if I recall correctly, they only ran one negative letter, representative, I'm sure, of many, many more voices.
Sure.
And the line in response from the editors might have been Hef himself, because 1955
at that time,
was
for
early.
Sure. Yeah, he was the editor.
Or might have been Spec, A.C. Spektorsky, just wrote back like one sentence and said, if in a world where persecuting heterosexuals is wrong, then surely the opposite must be true as well. Wow. And it was something along those lines. It just really put that dissenting voice in its place and saying like, no. This is the metaphor you need to understand.
Exactly. Love it.
So I love stories.
Yes.
Like
that. Again, thank you for sharing your history. And again, I just learned so much.
Well, look, I was the trivia nerd. So I think that was why partly I was able to stick around and bounce around as much as I did, because, pre-Google, we could be there in the office and like, hey, what year was Hef born? 1926.
Like, how did we even survive?
I know.
It's so weird.
Right.
Like we had pagers and stuff. It was so bizarre.
Right. And I always got a thrill, like, if my name showed up somewhere, because I was just speaking about A.C. Spektorsky, and I was really interested in the lives of these people and the careers of these people who shaped the magazine, and that was somebody who some years and years after he passed away, a newspaper or somebody wanted information about him. And I guess whoever is in the office with figured like, well, John will probably know, so we'll know where to look to find out.
Go to trivia.
So then that became my thing.
That's awesome. Tell our listeners, what is your podcast so they can find it?
Yeah. So if people go to podcasts.roddenberry.com, RODDENBERRY, I know, a very short, easy name, then they'll find a multitude of shows. There's Mission Log Live, there's Sci-Fi 5, Trek Files is one where we do kind of what I was describing before. We go to the archive, we pull a document, and then we get somebody who is an expert on that document. And it's really lovely. We had, she passed away a couple of years ago, but Dorothy Fontana, who, speaking of people who broke ground, in 1965, 66, she's Gene's assistant at that time.
Interesting.
And then changes her name in order to get scripts through the process, going as Michael Richards, because
she was a woman.
Yeah, because who would believe
Exactly.
a woman sci-fi
Exactly.
writer on national TV?
Wow.
And so sometimes went by Michael, sometimes went as DC, so people wouldn't associate Dorothy, with
clever.
Yeah.
Clever, but unfortunate. That was but
That was
of the time,
reality,
that's what you had to do.
But I love it. We'll go in and we'll pull a document and then have that person in here in this room to tell us their story.
That's awesome.
And and that's why I love what you do.
Thank you.
Because you and Karina, you're doing this oral history of this cultural force that I feel like it has always been misunderstood a little bit.
Always.
And now the magazine doesn't have a voice for itself.
Well, the magazine doesn't exist.
Because there isn't a magazine.
No, it's a brand now.
Yeah.
It's like, Playboy died when Hef died.
Yeah.
I mean, period. That's the way,
and
I view it.
And it's a damn shame because there are smart people. I think you can assemble a team of smart people again who can have this culture shaping voice. But I don't know who's going to back it. And like you just said, it is a brand, but it's a brand without that voice.
Yeah, and speaking to that, it was unfortunate, because Cooper definitely was a very, very big, part of knowing that he was going to go into the magazine at some point and follow in his father's footsteps. He wanted to do that, and he did. And unfortunately, at that point, Playboy had been sold, I think, 7 years previously. And so the Hefners only maintained 30% ownership. Right. And I swear to God, it was like the day Hef passed, the next day at Playboy headquarters, the full rebranding started. And that's when they said they're going to do non-nude. Yeah. And then they were going to do a digital magazine, and Cooper saw the writing on the wall, and he's like, I cannot be a part of this.
Good for him.
Yeah.
Good for him. Yeah.
It just didn't make sense.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's why I'm not running that company, but I don't know what the right combination is and the right venue is to have that voice. But I do think that it is a voice that's lacking because, look, for all the negative things we can say about the media landscape today, the good thing is that there is a national social conversation about gay and trans rights and bi rights, and that's good. That is a good
more
thing.
Than ever.
More than ever. And that is the kind of thing that Playboy would have been pushing as part of the conversation. How do we, I mean, look, you've got the, quote, don't say gay bill in Florida. This is exactly the kind of thing that I would expect to open Playboy to the forum section and see an article by Jim Peterson just absolutely destroying what's going on down there.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, I just don't think that there's anybody that could have come in and taken it over after Hef died. I think it is exactly how it was supposed to be. And it was 60 years of incredible publication. And Hef was hands-on until the day that he died. Yeah. And there's a part of me that, what, I'm happy that magazine will stand as it was. And I stand by that Playboy does not exist today. Yeah. And it will never occur again. Yes, there is Playboy.com, but it's a brand. Sure. And so, you know what? We were fortunate to be a part of it. We were fortunate to, take that journey. And everybody from Playboy will say the same thing. So with that said, I want to ask you two questions that we have asked all of our guests at the end of the interview pertaining to your experience at Playboy. So 3 words that describe Hef.
Oh, let's see. Thoughtful. And I say that in the way that it just not emotionally thoughtful, but intellectually thoughtful.
Yes.
One of my favorite things was that I still have them at home somewhere. If a memo would come by that was something that Hef wrote, like commenting on a cartoon or whatever, and it would be like 9 pages long, single space. Detailed. And I was like, this is a journalism education in a memo, right? So his thoughtfulness about the details were absolutely incredible. Trailblazer, absolutely, to be sure, and an advocate.
Absolutely.
I think his advocacy is an important part of his legacy. And yeah, you can point to all the things that are very clear, like getting behind civil rights issues and drug reform laws and abortion repeal laws and everything that he personally or the magazine or the foundation worked toward. But I also think that part of the conversation the magazine was pushing was a form of advocacy.
Absolutely, it was.
So I think that was critical to his legacy.
Yeah. Okay. If you had the chance to say anything to Hef before he passed or in memoriam, what would you say?
I feel like the easy way, and it's interesting in that the whole time that I was there, I didn't actually meet Hef, but it was really lovely. Before I left, he signed a book for me that came through the interoffice mail. And I still treasure that. That was really cool.
Yeah.
So I think the obvious one is thank you. And I feel like a lot of people would say that as well.
That's the majority of people just say thank you.
But I would also say, in 2 words, well done.
Bravo.
Talk about a life well lived.
On his terms.
By your own terms, by your own... Isn't that the American dream? To just live how you want to live? Many ups and downs in there, many trials in there.
That's part of it.
But that is part of it.
Yeah.
So well done.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we just had a full interview with you then about Playboy. I like it. We knocked that out.
And I've got more to go. But thank you.
That's awesome. Okay. All right. So let's move on to what we're going to get into.
I'm going to stop and save this, shall I? Okay.
Yep.
All
That's
right.
actually a perfect idea.